Puritans. They may hate fun, they may hate, well, any kind of joy, really, and they definitely hate anyone who's not a Puritan. However, they are also incredibly important in establishing early American culture, so let's get into it. Oh, and before we begin, please make sure that you are taking copious notes on this video, because you will be able to use those notes on a quiz in class tomorrow. Okay, well, the roots of Puritanism go back to the roots of Protestantism, which was began by a man named Martin Luther. Around 1517, he wrote 95 theses. These were problems he had with the Catholic Church. And please remember that the Catholic Church back in the Middle Ages was really the only church. If you were Christian, you were Catholic, in other words. Unfortunately, the church was super corrupt. The Pope was out of control. The hierarchy was a mess. And understandably, people were getting upset with it. The institution was a disaster. So along came Martin Luther, came up with 95 ideas for fixing the church, for making it a better institution, which eventually led to groups breaking off from the Catholic Church to start their own versions of Christianity that were kind of free from the tendrils of the Vatican. And one of those men was named John Calvin. He took the ideas that were posited by Martin Luther and used it to create his own church, which maybe he had a bit of an ego. I'm not sure if he called his followers Calvinists or they called themselves Calvinists, but the name stuck. Eventually, the Puritans spun off from the Calvinists. So Calvinists were part of the Protestant movement. Puritans were part of the Calvinist movement. And their name, as you can obviously tell from the root word, means pure faith. Many of them decided to flee England because of persecution, but others decided to stay, figuring that England was a corrupt place and that maybe they should stay there and make things better. The ones who did leave to go to the New World, as it was called, they really wanted to create a perfect society. They wanted to create a utopia. And they even came up with this term, which we'll look at further in some of the Puritan writings, of city on a hill, which actually comes from the New Testament, I think, from the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus tells his followers they are a city on a hill. They are a light for the world to learn from and to become better from their example. And this is an idea that becomes incredibly important in American identity, where America is this exceptional country that all other countries should model themselves after. And you even hear it used in modern political discourse. Ronald Reagan, during the end of the Cold War, used that expression as well. So that goes back to our Puritan roots. The settlers who came here to escape persecution in England and to found a perfect society. So some of the main things that you need to know about Puritanism in order to understand the culture and the literature. First thing is they had a very literal interpretation of the Bible. So later we're going to read a play called The Crucible, which is about the Salem witch trials. And that whole just horrible situation was an extension of the literal belief from the Bible that witches are real and witches are among us and corrupting us. They also believe that God has complete sovereignty. People are essentially unimportant. Maybe the most important aspect of their belief is this idea known as predestination. And I'm not sure if you remember this from your history class, but predestination is the idea that when you're born, God has already decided where you're going in the afterlife. He already knows if you're going to heaven or hell, and it's a mystery to you. You won't find out until you're dead, but everyone kind of assumes, if you are a Puritan, that well, yeah, of course I'm going to go to heaven. I'm Puritan. I'm living life the way God wants me to. So But it does raise a lot of questions, right? Like, if God has already decided this, well, why should I act good? What's the point of life if there's no free will? Well, they believed that they wanted to be that, they wanted to be that shining city on a hill. They wanted to show others the right path. So that's why you should live a good life, even if God has already decided where you're going before you've even really lived. They believed that natural human tendencies, anything regarding romance, was sexuality. All those things were evil. So that was a very suppressed society. They assumed that most people are probably doomed, and that God will actually punish those who misbehave or who sin. They hated Catholicism. I mean, that goes back to the roots of the religion, roots of Protestantism, but they were very suspicious of the Catholic Church and the Vatican. Not surprisingly, predestination caused a lot of anxiety. I think that many of them, in order to sleep at night, assumed that they were going to heaven, but there's really no way of knowing. God was all powerful. He had total control over everything. So maybe he decided already that I am going to hell, and what am I going to do about it? So there's anxiety there. It underlies a lot of their culture and a lot of their literature. Not surprisingly, they tend to focus more on the Old Testament, less of the New Testament. So they really love the Old Testament God, who's constantly angry and smiting sinners. That's their God of choice. They have little regard for clergy. We'll see in the Crucible that the clergy members are often more political figures who may be popular or unpopular depending on the job that they're doing. And as a reaction to the Catholic Church, they're against celibacy. Clergy members can get married and have families. One of the strange things about Puritanism, one of many strange things about Puritanism, is kind of the reversal that happened. I mean, they came over to escape persecution and ended up persecuting others. For instance, anyone they viewed as a heretic, they banished from their colony. Some major examples of those would include Anne Hutchinson. She thought that God actually could reveal himself in different forms. Not okay with Puritans. She was gone, kicked out. Roger Williams, he had this crazy idea that church and state should be separate, that you should be free to practice whatever religion you want, that it was okay that actually a theocracy is not okay. And, well, none of those ideas were okay with the Puritans. He got kicked out. The other characteristics of the Puritans, they were fairly wealthy, they were educated, they could read and write. Education was very important in their society. Just to give you guys a little bit of a time frame, by the early 1700s, Puritanism is dying out. Colonies are advancing and changing, and this old style of like Bible thumping religion isn't really finding an audience. Then, for a brief time period in the 1740s, it comes roaring back in this movement called the Great Awakening. And then we're actually going to look at listen to a speech from the Great Awakening. So it's a little bit later, but it is Puritanism. And it's pretty shocking. I think you'll agree with that. And then finally, after the Great Awakening, Puritanism just sort of peters out for good. Culturally, there were some differences between the northern and southern Puritans. You saw the growth of an aristocracy in the South, whereas the North largely depended on cooperation in order to survive. These were not, they did not sign up for an easy life when they came over to settle the colonies, not at all. But sometimes that cooperation broke down, and things got ugly. That happened occasionally, as we will see. Like I said, the very literate society, the printing press, they've established those in the northern settlements. And then just a few notes about Puritan writing. It has certain characteristics that I think we'll pick up on pretty quickly. There was outward writing. In other words, travelogues, when they would talk about their journeys from the old world to the new world, and then some minor exploration in the area. They would describe the land around them. They thought nature was evil and Native Americans were evil. Like I said, they thought everyone was evil. So when talking about nature, there was a sense of doom and hellishness, and Satan was out there in the woods. Really dark stuff. And then they would also write about the inward feelings of a Puritan, their spirituality. They'd write about the lives that they live, going back to, serving as examples for others. They did also write poetry, and we will look at a few poems. They did not write plays. They did not write novels. They believed that novels and plays were lies. You were breaking a commandment. You were lying. This didn't really happen. This isn't truthful. So that stuff. Poetry. Novels and plays were not okay, but poetry was all right. And it's really served 5 purposes. One was very simple religious instruction for children, because you have to indoctrinate the kids early to get them on board. More complex religious messages for adults, some deeper issues, and we'll actually look at a poem that falls into that second category. Historical verse about, they could be things going on during the time period, or past great moments in Christianity, for instance. Funeral verses, and those, of course, are memorials, but also meant to inspire others to live a good life. And then in personal reflections, important events in an individual's life. And the poem we're going to look at is a mix of the second and fifth category, actually. So, okay, well, that's it for the Puritans. Hope you enjoyed learning about them. Even if you absolutely hated this and it was complete torture and this has drained your life of any meaning, well, perhaps you have learned something from the Puritans after all. All right, hope you took some notes. There's going to be a quiz on this, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.